Welcome, everyone, to today's show. I'm Jeja Flazanes, your host and producer. Thank you for downloading today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about The New Rules of Marriage. It's a book written by Terry Real. And before I tell you a little bit about Terry, let me tell you a little bit about today's conversation. So for those of you that have been listening for a while, you know that I like to get to know my guests and get them to know me so we can have a deeper conversation than we might otherwise. I want to play at a higher level, and I want to come in sort of letting them know and introducing myself so we can get to the root and the fun stuff and the new stuff, new for you and new for me. So there's a little bit of my story intertwined in the beginning of today's episode because Terry is a marriage and family therapist, and we are talking about the new rules of marriage. And Doug and I had done a Inner Circle podcast episode on one of the other concepts I really love from his book, the 5 losing strategies in relationships, which is a great conversation. And pretty soon we'll be recording the 5 winning strategies in relationships and also put that in the Inner Circle. Today's show is going to be centered around one concept that I found fascinating when I read Terry's book. And one of the things I didn't know was going to happen when we recorded this, and we also recorded on video. So when I'm on video, I'm a little bit more aware of paying attention, of being a little bit more on, of a little more concerned about editing. And Terry therapied me. He asked permission, and I gave him permission. But in editing this and in retrospect, I would have answered the questions a little bit differently. I just want you all to know that I don't think I know everything. And I don't think that everything I did was right. And that everything I did in my marriage was correct or was that I had learned it so well that I mastered it. I didn't. I just know that I tried the best I could. So I hope that when you hear today's show, you recognize that I wasn't the most optimal place to be in therapy and then to share it with you. I have no problem being vulnerable and sharing with you anything I find helpful for me to go through that helps you go through what you're going through. But because I wasn't expecting it, and I always question how much I'm saying to affect other people, I didn't go as deep as I could have. So just know that, and please forgive me if any of it rubs you the wrong way, or if you think I'm holding back. It wasn't purposeful. Terry Real is a nationally recognized family therapist and author, particularly known for his groundbreaking work on men, his work on gender, and couples. In 1997, he published the national bestseller, I Don't Want to Talk About It, the first book ever written on the topic of male depression. Terry has appeared often as a relationship expert for Good Morning America and ABC News. His work has been featured in numerous academic articles, as well as media ventures such as Oprah, 2020, The Today Show, CNN, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Psychology Today, and many others. He has been in private practice for 30 years, and he is the founder of the Relational Life Institute, where he teaches therapist trainings and workshops for couples. Terry's book, The New Rules of Marriage, shares practical strategies for bringing honesty, passion, and joy back into even the most difficult relationships. Welcome, everyone, to the show. I have the pleasure today of having Terry Real, on the show today, both audio and video. So if you're listening to this on the podcast and you want to come watch it on video, go over to jjflazanes.tv so you can catch the video. Because I'm going to show you this book. The book is called, what we're going to talk about today is The New Rules of Marriage. This book was recommended to me at the end of my marriage. And of course, I'm always I started my whole podcast quite literally to save my marriage and to learn and to educate, sort of that byproduct of, well, if you don't listen to me, maybe you'll listen to someone else and I won't force it on you. Maybe just you'll catch it. So I've learned a lot over the years. I've applied a lot of this, and obviously my story will come out for those of you that don't know it a little bit here and there. But what I loved about the New Rules of Marriage when it was referred to me was the beginning part that you talk about. We have 21st century desires, but we're using 20th century tools. And while I know you weren't blaming the men, there was an emphasis on, guys, it's time to kind of grow into a new way. So without further ado, Terry, please tell us your story as to why this book, when you wrote it, what was happening for you, and how you got here.
Okay, well, let's do 2 pieces. One is my personal piece, and the other is more the cultural piece. As people might know from my first book called I Don't Want to Talk About It, which was about male depression, including my own and my own relationship with my dad. I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional family. There's a saying that therapists are people who need to be in therapy 40 hours a week, so that's why we do what we do. Um, I had to become a therapist to learn how to heal myself from a pretty dysfunctional family growing up in my childhood. And I did that. And then I went on to family therapy training, I think, to learn how to have relationships. And it got me further than I would have gotten on my own, for sure. Uh, but I was dissatisfied with the way therapy was done in this country. I think there's some major design flaws, and we can double back on that. So I created my own school of therapy called Relational Life Therapy, RLT. And the book is an expression of RLT. It's for the general public, though. In terms of why this book, look, to me, it's really simple. Marriage has been in pretty bad shape for 50 years, 43 to 48% failure rate. And at the same time, we've never wanted more from our long term relationships. I want to say we've never had wilder ambitions, and we've never had more primitive skill sets. So let's big picture. We all live in an individualistic, narcissistic, anti-relational, addictive, patriarchal culture. That's the water we all swim in. We're the fish. And in this patriarchal culture, relationships are coded as feminine. Relationships are a chick flick, right? I mean, nobody blows anybody up. It's a relationship. So, one of the things I believe is that one of the great stories of the 20th century is going to be the changing role of women. The women got empowered, women got culturally empowered, women got financially empowered, and women don't need marriage the way they did in, say, Jane Austen's day, right? Where if you weren't married, you were in a little cabin in the woods somewhere by yourself. They don't need marriage. And so, in order to keep a woman married, you have to offer more than a paycheck, which was the traditional deal. The traditional deal was breadwinner, homemaker, and dad brought home the paycheck. He worked very hard. If he didn't beat anybody or drink too much or screw around, he was a good guy. So what if he demeaned you 3/4 of the time he talked to you? So what if he ignored you and treated you like furniture? Those were quality of relationship issues that nobody cared about back then. Just suck it up and go back to your good man. Nowadays, women are done sucking it up. And the bar has been raised. When I say we've never wanted more from our relationships, the reality is I'm not talking about men and women equally. It is women who have been socialized to know more about relationships. I'm not saying you're perfect, but you know more about relationships than us guys. You want more from your relationship than us guys, and you have more skill than we do. So you add all that together, and here's what you get. I believe that women across the West in heterosexual relationships, we can talk about same sex relationships, go Supreme Court. But in terms of heterosexual relationships, women across the West are asking for more emotional intimacy than we raise boys and men in this culture to deliver. Now, it's changing. The younger the man, the more expressive he'll be. Millennials are good, generally, much more progressive than my generation, baby boomers. Baby boomers are in big trouble. There's a gray divorce revolution going on right now, and the statistics on divorce are sky high. So the tragedy is, look, I got Harry in my office. He's been dragged in by Sally. Most men are what I call wife mandated referrals. They're not there on their own. They've been dragged. And I say to Harry, you're a statistic, man. There are hundreds of thousands of you being dragged into offices just like mine. And we can't blame every one of your mothers. There's something collective going on. And what that is that what you learned as a boy, whether you wanted to learn it or not, it was imposed on you. What you learned as a little boy about what it means to be a good man, to be strong, to be tough, to be non expressive, to not be vulnerable. These qualities, by today's standards, will ensure that you're seen as a lousy husband. There's a role disjuncture between the traditional way we raise boys, and the new demands that women are asking of men. And I think that the response, by and large, to these new demands has been conservative. Back off, go, just accept your guy, blah, blah, blah. Don't want women to stand off of these demands. I want men to stand up and meet them. Because, look, I'm a family therapist. Intimacy is good for you. There are hundreds, dozens, and dozens of studies. Intimacy is good for your health. It's good for your mental health. It's good for anxiety, depression, all sorts of things. It boosts your immune system. You'll live longer. Your kids will be happier. So what I say to these guys is, listen, you don't need to go along with the old script. I can teach you a few things about how to be more relational, and I'll teach her to accept your efforts when you're trying and not shoot you down. Will you give it a shot? And I got to tell you, 99.9 men out of 100, when you give it to them straightforwardly like that, will say, oh, okay, what do I need to learn? One of the big differences between the work that I do, RLT, and other forms of therapy is that we're not neutral. We take sides, and we particularly side with whoever is asking for more intimacy in the relationship, which is most often women.
In my experience, one of the things I appreciated about my last relationship was the desire that I felt for these things, which is one of the reasons why, again, that I've done a lot of imago therapy. I'm a big fan. Harville's been on the show several times. I've done Getting the Love You Want workshop. And while I agree with and implement and love about 90% of it, there's a few pieces that I think needed to be upgraded. But generally speaking, it's a great tool I love to use. And you talk about this in one of the sections that I really found new and interesting to me about the core negative image, which I want to talk about today, and how you're encouraging people to, it's at certain stages, take responsibility for what you can, but you can't force your partner to do it. And at certain times, it'd be best if you had a partner who would do this with you. And I remember having the feelings when I chose my partner based on, I feel like, our emotional capacity for all the depth that we wanted. But as you were saying, and I think why this resonated with me and all women, I'm sure, is that I felt like I had more tools. And every time we started to go down that path, let's say an upper limit or a fear or a trauma would show up, and there was no way to deal with it necessarily that made sense. There wasn't a common language. And so through traditional therapy, through working with, and I think that for us too, women, working with certain women without, again, a structure. I've learned over time that I think a lot of men really don't love therapy because they don't see an end in mind. It's sort of like, I'm just supposed to go and talk. And every week you're taking me on this journey. You're asking me how I feel. And we're spending all this time talking about what happened yesterday and this argument we had. Like, that's why I've never liked traditional therapy, because it's like, can we get to the core wound and then like heal that so that none of this little shit happens? Because like, I would have that happen too. And I felt like that was not going to take it. So of course, nobody wants to go to therapy. If you come in, we talk about what bad thing happened yesterday. We dig up all these bad feelings. And, oh, it's 50 of, you got to go. Bye. See you next week. Right?
Look, there are three phases in RLT. The first phase is loving confrontation. Hey, look, JJ, this is what you're doing to blow your foot off. You will never get more of what you want by doing this thing. Let's say, I'll give you a dysfunctional stance. A dysfunctional stance is an angry pursuer. Let's say you're banging on your partner's door going, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. I'm so mad. I'm so hurt. I feel so lonely. You never talk to me. You always this, you never that, blah, 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 blah. Okay? That is a dysfunctional stance that will never get you hurt. Now, the first phase of RLT is, listen, I got some bad news for you, JJ. Role play, JJ. I don't know if this is really what you... I got some bad news for you. You want to hear what it is?
Yes.
Angry pursuit is not seductive. You want to hear that again?
No, I get it. And I didn't do that, but I get it. And I see it though in women, which is why I think your book not only addresses men, but, women also play a role in doing things that don't, they put too much pressure on a man to make them happy. And I teach law of attraction, and people, if you're not happy independently, forget someone trying to make you happy. There's a hole in your bucket. It's never going to get there. But continue.
Well, I ask couples to outlaw the word makes me from their vocabulary. I make myself feel blah, blah, blah. But let me go through the thing. The first is loving confrontation. Angry pursuit is never going to get you what you want. Take a look at what you're doing. I call this waking up the client. And we are not neutral. We take sides. We side with the disempowered one. I have a saying, we like the mighty to melt, we like the weak to stand up. So when there's a power imbalance, we side with the one who's in the one down position and empower them to come up. Use that as leverage to bring the one who's one up down. The second phase of our work is inner child work, trauma work, early childhood work. And most couples therapy doesn't do that, but we do. We do deep trauma work while your partner is sitting there. You are crying, you're talking to your 3-year-old self, you're crying, you're sobbing, and your partner's sitting there. And what are they doing? Their heart is opening as they watch you do this work. So that's the second phase. The third phase is education, which is missing also in a lot. I think it's borderline abusive for a therapist to say, well, hey, look, JJ, this is what you're doing wrong. And then not turn in the next sentence to, this is what right would look like. Let me teach you how to do it. So the first is loving confrontation. This is what you're doing that's never going to work. The second is, let's go back to your childhood and figure out where you learned how to do that. What were you adapting to back then? And then the third is, let me show you a different way of doing it. There's a relational technology that I cover in the book, which can be learned and mastered. How to speak up for yourself with love, how to listen and really listen and not rebut, how to make repair and not be defensive, what to do when you're in your adult self and your partner's in an immature part of them and won't come out and you want to kill them. I cover the basics of how to run a relationship, which our culture does not give people.
And what is your message, let's say, for the man who feels so defeated? I think, one of the common beliefs of men is it's never good enough. I never win. It's never good enough. I never can do it right.
Yeah, well, we humans, there's a lesson for women here, because a lot of what we do is we try and make our relationship better by being passive. We don't work on the relationship. You don't tell your guy what you want up front. You just let him fumble around, let him fail, and then criticize him for how he did it wrong. This is about the worst behavioral modification program I've ever seen in my life. You wouldn't do that to a dog. You wouldn't do that to your child, but you do it to a spouse. So I want women to be proactive, not reactive. I want them to negotiate, be more assertive up front and less resentful on the back end. And there's a whole chapter on moving from complaint to request. What will come to you is a complaint. Oh, I hate it that he blah, 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 blah. But in the middle of that complaint, there's always a request. I don't like him doing that. I would like him if he did that. Let go of the negative past and lead with the positive future. So instead of, for example, as simple as saying, I don't like how you're talking to me, you tone that down, becomes, hey, listen, honey, I want to hear what you have to say. Could you tone it down so I could really listen to it? Two ways of saying the same thing. I call this standing up for yourself with love. And this is the new terrain, I believe, for women. Women shift back and forth between being disempowered and being, forgive me, but shrill. I like to say, when women finally do get up ahead of steam and find their voice, they do it often in a way that nobody could listen to. So I want women, when they do speak, to be assertive and skillful so that it minimizes the man's defensiveness. And I want men to move out of that victim position. Oh, there she goes again. And instead, I ask men to feature themselves as being a generous gentleman, an emotionally generous gentleman. Ask yourself at any, your partner wakes you up at 1:30 in the morning because she's worried about one of the kids. Your instinct, your first response is, oh God, leave me alone. It's 1:30 in the morning. Stop and ask yourself, what would a generous gentleman do right now? Okay, let's talk about one of them. You give it to her. There isn't enough giving in our relationships. We don't assert enough and we don't give enough because we're so resentful because we didn't assert ourselves and get what we should have gotten to begin with. More assertion up front, less resentment on the back end. That's my recipe for women.
I love that. And one of the things that I add into some of the work that I do between law of attraction and astrology and all the different tools I combine into one is also compassion and teaching people how to look from someone else's point of view. I feel like like you were talking about a narcissistic, patriarchal, I forget what other words you used about the culture we're in, but it comes from a victim mentality, which is one of the things, I like to educate people on too. I was a classic rescuer and my ex is a classic victim. And I got that dynamic from my mother, who is a classic victim. And so I, of course, was trying to rescue her, and then I was trying to rescue him. And then my addiction was being a rescuer and all that good stuff. And so kind of working that out, but having both compassion for the other person, which I find a lot of people get defensive about what they didn't get. And they're acting from that, again, core wound that they have. And I love the way you put it, because when I was reading the core negative image, which is kind of where I want to go, because I think it's so powerful. It was a new concept to me that really quickly identified that one thing you're really fighting about, that one thing that really triggers you, that thing, right? It just, I like quick. I like get to the point. What is the wound? Here's how I react. Here's the pattern I do. Here's the fear I have. Here's what my need is not being met. Like the story and the story and the story. I don't give a shit about the story, because it just keeps us in this victim mentality of you did this and you did that. And it doesn't bring us back to actually taking action on A, what we can heal within ourselves to make it better, and B, having compassion for the other person, what they're going through. So the core negative image, when I was reading that, like, again, boom, I'm like, wow, that's a new concept. And I knew exactly what it was. And I had articulated it, but never like this. And I never addressed it head on. And I never addressed it even as something for myself to look at or work on what was true about the core negative image of me. I knew what the core negative image was of him, but I never thought to bring it up, to try and work on it, because I didn't know this concept. So why don't you explain what it is, and then let's do some work with it, because I think people can get a lot out of today's show with just this. This is so big.
Okay. So your core, there's a saying in family therapy that couples have the same fight over 40 years. And the reason why is this. You have a core negative image of your partner. It's usually just about, I tell people, about 4 or 5 words. That's all. Leave it there. You have a core negative image of your partner, and he or she has a core negative image of you. Now, the beauty, why you have the same fight over 40 years is because you go to the same core negative image. You see your partner through these same spectacles. It's like through the wrong end of a telescope, and they look tiny and pathetic. When you see your partner as being hopelessly impossible, I mean, I'm sorry I'm in this relationship. It was a big mistake. This guy or gal is such a jerk. That's your core negative image. So, for example, my wife, Belinda, has a core negative image of me as being a charming, narcissistic, man-child, irresponsible boy. Okay? I like to say it's an indication of just how sick she is that she would even think this of me, but she does. I have a core negative image of her as being a demanding, micromanaging, insatiable witch. Okay? Now, I don't mind outing ourselves, because this pair, irresponsible man-child, insatiable witch, is not exactly a rare heterosexual pair. A lot of people have this particular pairing. So the way it works is this. I leave the milk out of the refrigerator. This is 30 years ago when the kids were little. I leave the milk out of the refrigerator. Belinda comes down and she stops talking to me. She gets core negative image triggered, and she starts talking to that core negative image. She's talking to that irresponsible boy. You always, you're a bad role model. You're just like your father. You're a slob, blah, 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 blah. She's CNI triggered, core negative image triggered. What happens to me? Well, once she starts talking to me like that, I get core negative image triggered. And now I'm seeing her as the insatiable, controlling, critical witch. And how do I respond? Do I say, gee, I'm sorry, I left the milk out? No, I'm standing up to that witch. Hey, it's just don't give me so much, which doesn't go over that well. Here's the secret. Your partner's core negative image of you is a description of you at your worst that's exaggerated. Okay? It's not you at your best. It's not even you at baseline. And to be honest, it's not even an accurate description of you at your absolute worst. It's kind of like a purple, fruity, description of you at your worst. Having said that, it's true. Unless your partner is totally manipulative or psychotic, nobody would accuse me of being overly controlling and micromanaging. Nobody would ever accuse Belinda of being charming and girlish. It's like that's not we're talking about us. These images are about us. Now, what happens is when your partner's core negative image triggered and they come at you with this exaggerated version of you at your worst, 99 out of 100 of us will react to the exaggeration. Oh, I can't believe you think that of me. It's only this, it's not that. And you get defensive. Don't do that. It's like a Chinese finger puzzle. Instead of pulling against it, you come out of it by leaning into it. Okay, you got me. I left the milk out. You're right. I'm sorry. I can be undependable at times. To do this, it really helps. And you have to have some recovery around boundaries and self esteem, where you're going to go ape when you hear this. But assuming you can keep yourself centered and adult when you listen to this, it's amazing to put each other's CNIs on the table. And already just speaking them to each other diffuses some of it. It helps you with your boundary. Once your partner says you're this, that, and the other, A, B, C, and D, the next time he acts like you're A, B, C, and D, instead of taking it personally and going totally nuts, you take a breath and you go, oh, he's CNI triggered right now. He's not talking to me. He's talking to me, my CNI. See, in the past, you'd be CNI triggered. You'd go after him, and the two of you would just escalate. I like to say your CNIs at that point are having the fight. The two of you can sit down and have a beer. You're not even there anymore. It's just CNI versus CNI. So put them on the table. When your partner comes at you with that CNI and you know that CNI exists, it takes the sting out of it. And then the other great thing about putting it on the table, if I may, is it gives you operating instructions. Everything I know, Belinda CNI of me is an irresponsible, charming man child. Anything I do that's irresponsible is going to set her off. Anything that I do that's emphatically responsible is going to make her very happy. Your partner's CNI is a compass pointing in the opposite direction of where you want to go. Anything you do that's close to that partner's CNI will cause an upset. Anything you do that's the opposite of your CNI will cause you a happy evening. So it's very good operating instructions.
And what about diffusing it and healing it and rewiring the brain to not respond to that after you've learned it, after you see it, after you see the pattern? What are some steps people can take now? And I also want to address too what people can do, the ones that are listening they don't have a partner. And I know you address this in the book, but the ones that don't have a partner who's willing to do this yet, because I feel like this work independently can be done also to help them with compassion, perspective, take a breath, consciousness in choices, like you said, being able to see and having operating instructions. So I want to address both of those things.
It's a rare person who will refuse the invitation to tell you in a concise fashion the most negative ways they see you. Think about that. Hey, listen, I have a game. I learned this from this book. I want to put out 5 words that describe the way I think of you when I think of you at my absolute worst, when I think you're at your absolute worst, your most impossible. I go to these 5 words every time, and I want you to come up with a description of me when you think of me as impossible. And let's put them on the table. Okay? Most people will do that. It's an interesting invitation. Let me tell you what I really think. And then to work your CNI, it helps to know the truth of it. It's an exaggerated version of your partner at their worst. And what happens is one person, the two people keep trying to hammer their point to each other. You have 2 speakers and no listeners. And it's like, you're irresponsible, you're insatiable, you're irresponsible, you're insatiable, back and forth and back and forth. It helps to know what's going on. Oh, yeah, we're CNI triggered. Let's take a breath and let's come back to our centered adult selves because we're triggered right now. You see, in order to understand this, you have to understand this. The most important question in relational life therapy is not what are the stressors that the couple's enduring. Good couples can handle stress. It's not even what's the dance, what's the choreography, pursuer, distancer that goes on between the two of you. That's important, but not the most important. You want to know what the most important question is?
Of course.
Which part of you am I speaking to? Am I speaking to the present adult prefrontal cortex, or am I speaking to a triggered, past-based, trauma-based, emotional part of you, the limbic system and the amygdala? And there are literally different parts of you in your brain and in your autonomic nervous system and in your body. So if I'm CNI triggered, I am not in my adult part. I'm in what we call in RLT my adaptive child part, the part of me that adapted. So then we move into, okay, first we identify your stance. Let's say it's an angry pursuit. Then we go back into your family. Where did you learn this from? So may I, JJ, what is your stance? What was your stance in your last relationship? Can you
What was
articulate it?
my CNI?
Okay, what was your CNI of him?
That he would never take responsibility for his past, his wounding.
Okay, and what was his CNI of you? You can pass on any of that.
That I would outgrow him and he would never feel good enough and I would leave him.
That you were an endless victim and you would never be satisfied with him.
No, I think it was that I would outgrow that. So my path has been, I love to learn, I love to grow, I tackle any issue that comes up for me. I mean, I was one going to therapy trying to heal, getting defensive so that I could provide more love and compassion when being yelled at, because I understood that it wasn't coming from a place of like the present, it was coming from an old wound. And so for me to allow him to have the space to do that, I had the only thing I could take responsibility for was what can I do about it? Well, I'm getting defensive and defensive isn't helping. Me pushing back isn't helping. So how about I go work on accepting being wrong, not being heard, all the things that created my defensiveness so that I could provide more love and literally be Jesus and say, forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do. Like, let me stone me, but I'm going to love you anyway. And that the work I did around that did help energetically, but my core negative image was always, is this ever going to change? Are you ever going to change? Am I going to be stuck, with a victim for the rest of my life who doesn't take responsibility? Because I can't do this by myself. The why we got married, the reason why we wanted the relationship that we wanted, which I trusted and knew 100% we wanted very similar things, but all of the wounding came up to stop that from happening. And again, and I did everything I possibly could, literally possibly could on my side, from changing my own neural pathways to learning about imago, to doing law of attraction, to never blaming for my feelings. I am the non-blamer. You will never, ever, ever hear me say you made me feel anything, because as far as I'm concerned, no one else affects me except me. Now, if I'm triggered, that's on me and I got to heal that. So, but I have good boundaries too. So for me, it was the trigger would get the fear of either having children and then having him die or having, always having these fights and never connecting, never having the intimacy that I know we both really wanted, feeling like I'm doing so much and you're not doing anything.
Let me ask you this. When you would feel these things, how would you respond? And be honest.
Defeated, fear. I would normally need to take a beat and go, away, like to the next room or something. But what I would do, my compensation pattern was to rewind the story about why he was acting that way so that I could come back to it with compassion. Now, what I learned in terms of my, like, how I deal with things that didn't ever work, and I learned it at the end and I got it loud and clear and I stopped it immediately when I finally got it, was when I don't get what I want, what I do is I educate. Right? So
there you go.
Yep, I educate. And I realized, and I knew it didn't work. He was telling me it didn't work, but I was doing it anyway. Cause I'm like, well, how can you not, like, look, it's in this book. It literally, like, what we're going through is in this book. Like, we're not weird. Everybody else experiences this. Why won't you read this so we can fix it?
Okay. Let me ask you a question, JJ. You can pass on this, but so you were emotionally abandoned or neglected in your childhood growing up somehow?
No, but I wasn't emotionally understood. I'm
okay.
different. It was never, who I am was never reflected back to me because I'm very different. I'm the black sheep. I was the gifted child who didn't know it, whose parents loved me and supported me, but didn't understand me.
Yeah. So you don't feel, so there's a little girl in you that is like banging on the window saying, hear me, hear me, hear me. I've got to get through to you. Yeah.
Definitely with my marriage. Absolutely.
Yeah. How old is that girl?
Maybe 4th or 5th grade.
So 10, 11.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, in those moments when you're triggered and you're banging on his door saying, hear me, hear me, hear me, hear me, I would say that 10, 11-year-old has taken over the wheel. And here's what I want to ask you. What do you think that 10 or 11-year-old needs to hear from you? If you could put yourself in a time machine and go back to her, what would you like to say to her?
Well, I think that a lot of that rooted in not feeling good enough myself, not feeling seen or heard, not feeling valued for what I could bring to the table, not feeling loved or understood at a place where I could actually connect with someone on a level that I wanted to. So
It
I
sounds
would have
very
told her she's
lonely.
enough.
That sounds very lonely.
Yes. Yes.
So you'd want to tell her, what would you want to tell her?
That you're not alone. You're not alone. We just don't we're having a misunderstanding, and it's not because you're bad, and it's not because you're wrong, and it's not because you're not good enough, and it's not because you're different. Right now there's just a little bit of misunderstanding, but you are loved. You are whole and perfect just the way you are. We just haven't found the right expression yet, and we have to accept me for who I am and love me and be compassionate to my needs and not demand it from others.
And how does she respond to that?
Well, I did some work around holding my 10-year-old self and crying in tears from a traumatic situation at one point. And that was very healing to give myself the love and attention I was looking for from others.
So that's your work. That would have been your work. If I saw the two of you as a couple, I would tell you his work probably is to be less addictive, be more responsible, take responsibility for himself, and not be a big victim. Your work would be to tend to that 10-year-old girl. So, and I would say to you, you're not desperate to be heard, JJ. She is. You, the grown woman, can take hearing no, but she can't. And so when you're CNI triggered, that means you're in your adaptive child part, the part of you that adapted to whatever was going on in your family growing up. You weren't heard, and your whole life mission, in some ways, including this podcast, is to get yourself heard.
One of the most
Yeah.
healing things I ever did, and did it literally to save my marriage, helped a lot of other people. And then finally, when I allowed myself to be who I was unapologetically and put out this show, Spirit, Purpose, and Energy, although every show is getting this episode today, and I got reflected back to me, people who actually wanted what I was offering at such a deep level. It was very healing. It was very
Yeah,
validating.
right. It's very healing because it makes up for the wound that you had as a child growing up. We all want our partners to do this. We want our partners to heal us by giving to us what we didn't get. But that's not how it works. The way it works is your partner is going to trigger you and precisely not give you what you didn't get, and you're going to go ape when they don't. At that point, if you can breathe, you can get centered, you can have a little chat with that 10-year-old who's so desperate and demanding and maybe angry, chill her out. Then you do something different with your guy. Then he does something more loving back. And that's what heals. It isn't that you get the other person to give it to you. It isn't that you avoid the old wounds. It's that once you're in the wound, you come into your adult, you take care of that inner child, and you do something different, which evokes a healing response from your partner. That's how it works. One of the things I say is that maturity comes when we handle our inner children and don't foist them off on our partners to deal with.
And that's what I love about so far the work I've helped to share to people. And I love that you do address some of that in your book as well, because if everyone has to start off by having a buy-in from their partner when things are at their worst, then I don't want people to stop working on themselves and the things that they can ease up a little bit so that, like you said, they can work on their own inner child and start to heal that. Because even if it doesn't save your marriage, it helps you in life and it helps you move on to be able to be more loving and compassionate to yourself. It reduces that trigger. It changes those neural pathways. And so I want to empower people, especially women, who are with a resistant partner who feels judged, who feels broken, who feels like, oh, I don't want to go to therapy again. And what is this going to do? And you're just going to tell me that I'm bad and I'm wrong and it's going to be all my fault. Like, if you're dealing with that, I just want people to not wait. And sometimes while I was doing my own thing, I didn't think about getting into like a couple's specific therapy because I thought I needed the buy-in and I thought I needed. And when I started doing it, I thought, oh, I could have done this 10 years ago. This would have been great for me. And I want to recommend, obviously, everybody get the New Rules of Marriage, right? So regardless of your status in your relationship, I think it's good even if you're thinking about getting married, because you can review. So my partner and I, Doug, we were reading the book this morning and we were going over some of the exercises with the CNI. And while we haven't identified our current CNI, although as you were talking, I'm like, oh, because we're like, oh, I don't think we have one. And then I'm like, no, we have one. We're so much better now, and we've been doing our own work. The minute I saw the repeat of patterns come in from the last marriages, I was like, we're gonna hit this one head on. And so we're really good. Yes, those things are still there. But when we were doing the exercises, we were using our ex-partners to reflect how we were. And it was so good and empowering to be able to like look back now, especially for him too, to say, oh, I see how that was going to end. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy to have the CNI rule my life and never address it, because I basically manifested exactly what I was afraid of, and vice versa. So,
which always takes you back to your childhood. One of the things I say is we all marry our unfinished business. Which was the parent that you were trailing after that you didn't feel heard by the most? Your mom or your dad, or was it equal?
it was equal, but I think it was more important that it came from my mother. My father was a very positive, supportive, happy, just exudes like simple happiness. He's just such a good, solid guy. And so while I wanted probably a little bit more attention, he was never that guy's guy dad. He was more of like the monk, kind of like very present. But my mom was more involved in my everyday life and all the things that were going on. So I think I wanted it more for her, but she couldn't give it to me because they would say things like, she's like, GJ, you're deep. I mean, like I would tell them things from school and I'd be like, oh, I'm so excited. Let me share this thing with you I learned today. And they'd listen and they'd go, wow. And they'd go, GJ, you're deep. And that's all they had to offer me.
Well, you were the scapegoat in the family. That was your job. There were three basic roles in a family: scapegoat child, hero child, and lost child, the one who gets ignored. The good one, the bad one, and the one who gets ignored. And you were, I'm a scapegoat child. And there's a gift. The scapegoat child is the one that expresses all of the subtext and the emotion that isn't being explicitly expressed by everybody else. So you serve the family that way by being the voice of all these unvoiced things, but then they don't value you for it. In fact, often they'll punish you for it. So you're the voice of truth, and you're getting nailed for being too sensitive or too this or not enough that. And that's your job. As you grow up being a scapegoat child, it's easy to fall into shame, self-blame. You're a bad person. That's why this is happening to you. It's harder to stand up for yourself. But scapegoat children have access to their emotions. Hero children are less emotional. They're more logical. And abandoned children are hungry. But this is why women like bad boys, because they're all scapegoat children and they have hearts. Bad boys all have emotions. They're very emotional, but they don't know how to have a relationship.
That's a really good point, because they are emotional and they're reacting they have this deep desire, but they have no tools on how to get it.
Yeah, that's right. And, one of the things I tell dating women is don't try and find a perfect guy. Find a guy who's good-hearted, open, and teachable. And then both of you go learn some relational skills, drag into relational skills courses. It doesn't have to be therapy. It could be an enrichment weekend. If I may, there's a course that I'm offering on my website. I'd love everybody to go take. It's called Fierce Intimacy. Fierce Intimacy.
What's the web address?
Terry, just my name, terryreal.com will get you there. TERRYREAL. And it's chock full of the same skills that are referenced in the New Rules of Marriage. It's a bit of an update. And it's audio. You can download it.
Well, let's go over what the products are for people at different stages. So let's say for the single person, what would you? I'm going to recommend everybody, doesn't matter where you are, get the New Rules of Marriage if you don't have it. So this is for me the first start. But where else? What else do you have? I mean, I didn't read it and I don't have it. I don't want to talk about it. That book that you wrote for men. I mean, I thought, God, that would have been perfect. But again, me wanting to teach would have been. But no, I don't want anymore. Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah. So what you need is a emergency course in detachment from outcome, if I may, JJ.
Well, I don't need it anymore. No, I learned my lesson, Terry. I'm good. When I was in it, it took me, my training ground was literally my marriage. It was my master's course in boundaries with compassion, with like understanding my core wounds and with doing what I could to heal those, and continue to work with when I get slightly triggered, to look at that and to embrace that and to do what I need to move through that. So I really made my marriage my master's degree in life. And not that I'm done learning, of course, right? I'm always learning. I love their conversation today that Doug and I had about the core negative image, and now bringing up that I'm sure we have one, so we should probably find it, even though we don't fight and things are good.
How long have you two been together?
2 years.
Yeah, you're still in the harmony phase. You don't have a core negative image because you haven't hit the skids yet. All relationships are an endless dance of harmony, disharmony, and repair. Closeness, disruption, return to closeness. And I call that first phase, harmony phase, love without knowledge. You have a deep soul connection to the person, but you don't really know what they're like when they're really at their worst. You don't know what the bottom of their closet looks like. You don't know how they are at paying bills. The second phase, which you haven't hit yet with Doug, is the disillusionment phase. This is where you look at your partner and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm trapped, and this is just awful." And one of the things I want to teach people is that disillusionment phase, which is not even acknowledged in our culture, is an important part of all relationships. It doesn't mean you're in a bad relationship. It means you're in a relationship. What makes a good relationship is what you do when you're in that disillusionment. And what you do is repair. And I cover that in both the New Rules of Marriage and in Fierce Intimacy. How, when you're off, the wheels are off, how to get them back on again and get back into repair. And you never know. For example, you did a beautiful job of trading in your, I guess, anger or judgment or educator to some compassion for your partner when he was being irresponsible. Did you stand up to him? And what would have happened, do you think, if you had?
Oh, yeah, I did. Again, it was always the dance of how can I get what I want from you and how can you get what you want from me, by me figuring out what I can do to help you not get triggered. So without giving up who I am, right? With not giving up my power, without just being compassionate at all, which felt better for me. And and ultimately, when you're in that kind of situation, it's never going to be a win-win, because that person, if they're not on board for taking responsibility, we're just reenacting over and over again that core wound, and it's never really. I mean, we went to therapy a few times, but it was never really going. You know how people go and they go, so they say they can go, but they're actually not really interested in learning and implementing and making any changes so that they feel better, because they really just believe the other person needs to change. No, you just need to be different.
Yeah. One of the things I say is there are deal breakers. And one of the deal breakers is this: if one of the two partners is at an evolutionary point in their development, which leaves the other one in the dust, if there's a big discrepancy in maturity levels, or if you will, health between the two partners, eventually the healthy one can't tolerate the ill health of the unhealthy one, and they have to leave. So you need a reasonably responsible partner, or you don't have a partner. You have a child on your hands. And if you don't have somebody who's going to be not perfect, but reasonably responsible, you don't have much of you don't have much traction. You don't have much leverage. You don't have much to go for. So you have to go for repair. But I do want women to speak up. I want women to stand up and speak up. But you've already mastered this. You've said it many times. The trick is to speak up in a way that is cherishing of your partner at the same time as it's setting limits for you. I really love you. I want to be closer to you. When you yell at me, I feel pushed away. That doesn't feel good. I would like to be closer to you. Could you please stop yelling? So you stand up for yourself and you cherish the partner in the relationship in the same breath. That is a brand new skill. People don't know how to do that in this culture.
I did not do that as well as I could have in terms of the cherishing part. Would feel it, but I wouldn't necessarily communicate it. It was kind of after the fact that while we did the 5 love languages tests and his was apparently acts of service. I mean, that's what I could tell from that. What I realized after it was all said and done is that he didn't realize what he probably needed was words. And I wasn't skilled at giving them at the time, even though words are my thing. He wasn't giving them as, words of affirmation. But I do believe now that's probably what he needed the most, the acknowledgement. And I will be honest, I didn't figure that out until it was too late. And so I didn't know. And there was some distrust there from a past abuse from him as somebody that would abuse him and then say something really nice. So there was this distrust of you wouldn't have, if you really meant it, you wouldn't have done what you did to me and then turn around and tell me nice things. So while again, I was not perfect and I did not excel. And I look back at things like this core negative image and thought, oh, would that have made a difference for me to have that conversation? I think that ultimately, because I also believe, like you said, we choose our partners to heal the wounds of our past. But I also believe in soul contracts and sacred contracts. And I believe one person, I've manifested everything I've wanted right now. I can spread my wings. I can be who I am. I am supported. I'm elevated. I am cherished. I am all the things at an intellectual and emotional level that I've never had before. So I wouldn't, and it happened super quickly. Once I spoke up for myself and said, I think it's time, and I really want to be married to someone who wants to be married to me. I give my heart, my soul, my blood, my sweat, my tears, literally every day to putting effort into this, and it's not being reciprocated. And I think I deserve more than that. I've done the patience thing, I've done the waiting, and so that's kind of how it came. And the minute I was finally ready to surrender and say, but it wasn't. I surrendered in a way that said, I still have hope. The hope is I know that we're in a pattern that you're not going to change until you leave. And while he wanted to leave months before that and I wasn't ready and I was clinging, I finally was trusting enough to say, okay, you can leave now. There's no rush. We'll separate. We'll give it a year and let's see what happens. Because of course I was hoping there'd be like this aha wake up moment. And of course what happened 2 hours later was that I manifested what I had been working for, literally keeping myself in like hopeful. I knew in the bottom of my heart, I knew I'd get the relationship that I wanted. Without a shadow of a doubt, I knew it.
You know what? I talk to women about becoming what I call relationship champions. And that means you get centered in the center of your soul with the understanding that it is your birthright to be in a cherishing relationship. And if you're in a relationship in which you basically do not feel cherished, that's bad for you. It's bad for the kids if you have kids. It's bad for the person who's not cherishing you. It's bad for everybody. Stand up for yourself and grab that person by the collar and with love and care, insist on being decently treated or get out. But don't sit there and be a victim and let it rot. That's not what I want. So I do want women to stand up. I just want them to stand up with love.
Absolutely. Me too. And I want them to not blame the other person for what they made them feel. I don't want them to blame them because women have a lot to learn too. As far as I'm concerned, I see all kinds of women who want to, again, make their husbands. We had friends that said, well, it was her second marriage. And she said, well, I'm not happy. I said, well, your happiness is not his job. Your happiness is your job. And if you don't learn something from this, you're just going to repeat it again. Again, that was my whole thing. I'm like, here's an opportunity. I'm willing to do it. I'm willing, right? Like you're going to repeat this if you don't learn it. And so for me, I have the emotion. I also have the logic and I have like that truth seeker. And to me, it was just ridiculous to not want to take this situation of commitment and learn it because you're going to eventually need to if you ever want to be happy.
Yes, being intimate is the only thing that really makes us happy. And most of us need to learn how to do it. We just don't know how to do it in this culture. But you're a shining example of somebody who's picked it up from the ground up. You're what my wife Belinda calls a retread. I'm a retread. She's a retread. Reconstructed human beings. So it's one thing, I talk to people about changing the legacy that they were handed. And all of us play the cards that we've been handed, but some of us go get new cards. And that's what you done, and it shows. The corrective healing experience, if I can say this, for you in your in your marriage, may have been that you left it. What was corrective and healing for you may have been, oh, what should my relationship to someone who's fundamentally be irresponsible be? I know, none. Good. Bye.
Right. Well, again, it feels better to me to come from compassion and love and say, I've done the best I can. I can't do this alone. I've done everything I can. If I had 5 more tools to try, I'd try them, because when I make a commitment, I mean it. I never want,
Yeah.
part of that was, my own issues of, I wrote a book called Fit to Love, for crying out loud. Okay. So part of me, I had a little bit of the shame of what happens if this doesn't work out, and if I failed and I'm publicly embarrassed because I couldn't save my own marriage. And when I got over that and loved myself enough to say, but this isn't this, I have done everything I possibly can to make myself know I've tried harder than any other freaking human being I know on the planet. I'm good with me. I honor and respect me. Time to move on to someone who actually also honors and respects me for what I do and what I bring. So,
yeah, well, it sounds like you tried to make your husband that guy and he just didn't want to be. So
nope.
you go find yourself someone else. My pal Esther Perel likes to say, she's a Belgian French, speaks, and she says, in my lifetime, I hope to have 6 marriages, and I hope they are all with the same man.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So if you're going to grow, that's an invitation for your partner to grow. And if one of you grows and the other one doesn't, that's a slippery slope for both of you.
Yeah.
But you stand up for the rightness of being in a cherishing relationship. Anything less than that is just, you'll get sick. A lot of women get physically sick when they're in a bad relationship.
Absolutely.
So,
and men do too. I've got a couple of clients who are, not that they're doing all the right things either for their own growth and happiness, but they get cancer to get out of it, or because they're not happy, they feel stuck, they feel no one's communicating. So of course their body has to come into play to help save them or give them an excuse to get out, when really just finding your words could help. But again, they're also in your age range. They're in the baby boomer phase where, you can't teach old dog new tricks kind of thing. Even though I've been pounding them for like 10 years. And finally after 8, one said, oh, my back pain is because I'm angry. Oh, I will accept that now. And now there's no more back pain. But it took 8 years. But I want to empower people with your information and with your trainings and with your workshops and with the tools, audio tools that you have. So let's go over what they are. Again, there's the New Rules of Marriage, which is a book I want everybody to buy right now if you haven't already on Amazon as you're listening to this. Also, I would think too that I don't want to talk about it, your book about male depression. I think that would also be, I don't have it, but I think that would be an awesome topic if you'd like to come back. I'd love to read it and then have another show directly for men, because I do have men that listen to me. They're quiet about it though. They're quiet about it because sometimes because the women get triggered by me, but their men are like, oh, but I agree with everything that she says, so I'll just keep this quiet. But I think that would help them. So where else can people go for information to work with you or get your trainings?
Yeah, just go to my website, terryreal.com. There is a online training program called Staying in Love that you can get, and it's full of exercises and stuff like that. I like Fierce Intimacy a lot. It's not that expensive. It's 6 hours of, it's basically like an audio book. And it's my updated version of the New Rules of Marriage. We have a lot of courses. Most of my courses are for therapists, though. But we have a lot of courses for both men and women. This fall, I'll be doing a course for the general public. It's my first course for the general public. And the name of the course is Us Moving Beyond Me and You. And it's really about getting past that win-lose, zero-sum way that we normally go about our relationships, and having the elevated consciousness of the biosphere called our marriage or our relationship. It's not about I win, you lose. It's about how are we going to work like a team and make this biosphere work for all of us. So I'm writing a new book. That's the title, Us, the Power of Moving Beyond Me and You. It won't be out for a year or two. But I'm doing a workshop online for the general public this fall on that topic, how to how to really operationalize, how to make real in your life practices that move you from a linear win-lose adversarial consciousness to what I call us consciousness. We're in this together. What do we both need to make this work? And it's a big, big shift for most people.
I would love to help promote it. So if you either want to come back on, it's in the fall, and right now we're in the summer. So we can either do another show to talk about it, or do a half and half. I kind of want to do this whole male depression. I don't want to talk about it. I think that would be super helpful for people. But I know that people need the help right now, and definitely if they're having it at their fingertips to do it virtually, it gets rid of the barrier of I can't travel there, whatever's going on in the world, whatever, and then I can just do it online. So I think that would be great, and I'm happy to share all about it and talk about it again. But everyone go to terryreal.com and check out everything that's there and see what is going to fit what you need right now. And then, of course, follow up, ask me questions. What do you want to hear more about, so we can ask Terry to come back on and do another show on something. And of course, go to his website, ask him directly. But I'd love to know what it is about today's show that sparked your desire for more and where we want to go with this conversation. Terry, I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it was marvelous talking with you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the work you're doing. It's really wonderful.